Please go ahead. Thank you very much for joining us, and good afternoon. We hope it will be an interesting conversation after lunch. Let us make it dynamic. This presentation has to do with one of the main themes of the Congress, which has to do with technology. And we are going to talk about biotechnology precisely. I will turn it over to my colleagues. I am Juan Manuel Villalba. I am a specialist in biotech, and the topic today is biologicals, old new technologies for agriculture. We are introducing Bactools, a new company that is being introduced for the first time in this Congress. It is a company that provides high-quality biotech solutions, improving productivity. We have two main lines of business: sustainable agriculture and animal nutrition and health. So this is our background, and let me share with you where we are headed as a tech company. We met at the lab of Rosario University when we were in the PhD program, so we started having several ideas for different projects, and in 2017 we started our own lab and some research and development in a garage lab. From 2017 to 2022, we had a maturation process. We added new professionals with a business perspective. And in 2023, we started to participate in different incubators, and we achieved a strategic partnership with a company in the chemical fertilizers area with more than 20 years of experience, Agrofer. We continued making progress in our biological product plant with field essays, and we are also trying to scale it up, to scale up our industrial processes. In 2020, 2026, we have a period to achieve the authorizations in order to include other lines of business, such as lipopeptides and vaccines. As I said at the beginning, Bactools is a biotech company. I'm sure you have already heard about biotech. Our focus is in this definition. There are many definitions of biotech. We use the one of the OECD. It defines biotech as the application of science and technology to living beings and to parts, products, and models to alter materials, living and non-living materials, in order to produce knowledge, goods, and services. So Bactools is focused on the production of bioassets. Today, there are solutions, knowledge, and services provided by biotech companies. But how did we get here? Let me go back in time and give you some background from the historical perspective. Biotech is divided into different phases. There is an empiric phase, a transitional phase, and two modern phases. As regards the empirical phase, it started 900 years before Christ, and it ended in 1680. In the middle, there were lots of inventions. One of them is a microscope in 1680. Then we had a transitional phase from 1857 to 1860. There are two main characters here, Pasteur and Mendel. Then we had modern phase 1 from 1869 to 1953, and this is when the main concepts that biotechnologists use, when those concepts were created. But our highlight or milestone is Ferdinand Kohn in 1872. And there is a modern phase 2 from 1961 to 1977, when we witnessed the introduction of antibiotics resistance and cloning, and also genetic information. So we focus on several milestones, such as the invention of the microscope, and also 1872, we focus on the founder of modern biotech, proposing this author proposed a system of classification of bioorganisms. Now, biotech has specific characteristics. It is a discipline that goes across all areas of life. At Bactools, we work on green biotech, white biotech, yellow biotech. And as you can see there, green biotech is agricultural, white biotech is industrial, yellow biotech refers to other areas, food, for instance, and the brown biotech area refers to veterinary sciences. So there are different plans and strategies across these areas. Argentina is a peripheral country, and it is also a leader in some of these areas. It has had some issues, but it also has a very strong component, which is bioeconomics. Bioeconomics, what is it about? I'm sure you have heard about it. It is mainly designed to create a new, sustainable, productive matrix. It is not intended to replace the current structures. It is intended to complement or supplement and improve the current systems. This is the result of a census of the application of biotechnology companies, and Bactools is within the agricultural sector. As we have said, the evolution of biotech has been increasing its pace with new tools, new knowledge, and today, in the agricultural field, one may hear about seed modifications, the addition of genes that are resistant to certain situations, and in our day-to-day lives, we also hear sophisticated concepts about biotech. When you bring, or when you talk about using products such as bio-inputs, a debate comes up. Even though this is not new, bio-inputs are not a new development, it is presented as something that is completely innovative. And also the inputs for inoculants or any products based on microorganisms are based on two events. One is of the year 1860, the creation of the microscope, and the other one is also supported by an event that took place 200 years ago. Now, the question about this historical review, why is it easier to talk about gene modification of plants? Why do we produce or we propose biotechnically modified products? There are many sides to this issue. Being biotechnologists, we believe that there is one explanation that fits the explanation of bio-inputs, the Rosario grain exchange. Here we have a chart of the evolution of production in Argentina by crop. There are 2 points where productivity increased. One is between the 50s and 70s, and the other one is between the late 80s and the 90s. And these have been marked with yellow and green lines. One of them was called the Green Revolution, and I'm sure you know about it. And the other one is no-till farming. So both Green Revolution and no-till farming were supported by fertilization. As we have said, the increase in productivity, you can see this on this chart. This is from 1990, when no-till farming started in Argentina. You can see the increase in fertilizers in Argentina, nitrogen and phosphorus fertilizers. In the previous chart, we showed total production. You can access the raw data from the ministry. You are able to design this chart, which is for a 5-year period. This shows soy crops, and this one wheat crops for Santa Fe and Buenos Aires. The evolution over 5 years of the yield per hectare on an estimated basis. For soy and wheat, there has been a positive evolution. So we conclude that the variation every 5 years from 1970 to 2022 for soy, we had an average of 30 kilos. Every 5 years, there was an increase of 30 kilos in productivity per hectare, from 100 kilos to 130 kilos every 5 years. So this means that adding different technologies has caused an undeniable change in the increase of productivity for grains. This increase in productivity required machinery, new seeds, new chemicals. The use of chemicals, nitrogen and phosphorus. As regards nitrogen, the obtention of molecules requires a lot of energy, and for phosphorus, there are 2 components of fertilization. It is a limited resource. Some authors have been talking about the depletion of phosphorus, and the areas where there are reserves of phosphorus have lots of conflicts. So the inclusion of new technology has 3 vectors. One is the environmental impact. This is something that every producer knows. In the case of nitrogen fertilizer, we can have volatility or leaks to underground water. Those leaks go to the rivers. There is a proliferation of microorganisms in those bodies of water, and this will create the death of fish. So these are potential implications. In Victoria, the water for farm animals was affected or was intoxicated, and the animals had health problems with nitrogen.
Other environmental issues that everybody knows about. Another vector that is fundamental is the situation that we're going through right now, at least mid or longer term, the issue that we are going through now. All big providers, suppliers of fertilizers, nitrogenated fertilizers, for example, are now in conflict. If those conflicts would finish, then the routes to distribute are also in conflict. So we need to see how to ameliorate that. On the other hand, there is this other issue. There are different authors that say this is not the case, but we understand it is the case, which is the dysbiosis concept, which is using some types of fertilizers systematically creates an imbalance. A clear example of this is a person who decides to have a diet with a lot of carbohydrates will have microbiota that is specific to that, and if not, they would have different microorganisms. It's the same with the soil, and I'm not speaking about the rhizosphere, but the soil in general. The utilization of fertilizers, as we're doing now, will inevitably generate a microbiota that is specific to that. All of those factors in the methods of production that we use right now inevitably lead to a loss of profitability that could be due to this evolution of 30 kilos every 5 years or 100 every 5 years, or it could be due to financial, due to the raw materials and the situation itself. So, AgroStrategy, Bactools has allied to this. It is Aapresid. It is a company that does chemicals. Sorry. I made a mistake there. Aapresid is a company that has been producing fertilizers for the past 20 years. These are chemicals, and they identify all of these issues that we've been discussing, and it brings forth a solution, which is a product that is agrobio. With Bactools, this product is being developed, and agrobio is not just a product, it is a concept. Let us imagine that suddenly all of the soils fertilized with nitrogen are reduced. The use of nitrogen in 1%, what would be the environmental impact? It would be 10% of the utilization of nitrogen, keeping the profitability of the fields. This product is a nitrogen-based fertilizer composed of microorganisms. So it is not a layering of technology where you first do fertilizer and then I do a biostimulant on top. But what we want from Bactools is to transform agrobio in a technological package like the Green Revolution was or non-tillage was, to add this solution globally. Bactools nowadays has two products. that are in the registering phase, in the authorization. One is a mono strain, and the other one is a consortium of 4 strains. The particular feature of Bactools when it comes to microorganisms are the spores. We focus the production on the basis of spore. Marcos will speak about that as well, about the features of spores. A bit quick, the tests that we're doing, we do have a stand, and you can come and see what we do. But for these tests, they were done in 3 different sites. Soy, without inoculating. I say that because you may think that they were inoculated. On fields that were fertilized with the recommended dose to the producer, and then 80% of that dose with BSP in the case of the blue bar. What we hope to see here is that at least 20% less of fertilization would be comparable to the 100% fertilized land. We found a positive response, and on the graph on the right, you can see the ones that are 100% fertilized and inoculated, and lands that are not. And what you see is a 9%, a 14% response, and 4.5% with regards to the 100% that was fertilized. On the case of the consortium of 4, it was done in 4 sites, and this is the yield. 6.5% was the average, and it was inoculated with Brady. And as we said, all of these technologies that we call old were always there. Thank you. Thank you very much, Juan. Now we will ask Marco to continue with the presentation. Hello, everyone. This is my presentation. I have a doctorate in biological sciences, and I'm going to speak about the same thing, but I will focus more on the new era of agriculture, which is spores. As Juan has said, our idea as a company is agrobio, which is to incorporate bacteria to a chemical fertilizer. And what we see here are Brady, Pseudomonas, Azostrilo, Ecoderma, and Bacillus. When we want to put bacteria into a chemical fertilizer, the problem is that the chemical has very adverse conditions for many bacteria. So when you mix it, the loss of viability of bacteria is very large, and generally the yield goes down so much that it doesn't have a positive effect on the land if you're working with a product that is already formulated from the beginning and that comes from the factory as such. None of these can survive. But why do I keep that the bacillus can still survive? It may sound as a contradiction, because bacillus is a bacteria that has 2 phases of growth. A phase of growth, which is normally as vegetative. May I add that bacillus is a bacteria, not a fungus. During the bacteria is metabolically active. It can reproduce. It generates offspring. But at some point, the bacteria may find in a condition where they don't have any more nutrients, in a condition where they know that the bacteria will not be able to survive. And then the price of all other bacteria generates a response that it generates other types of life, which is spores. And spores, we're here comparing it to a soy seed. It is a seed. It is latent. It is waiting for the right conditions for its life so that the bacteria may develop and grow. What are the advantages of spores? Let us imagine that one of the theories of life on Earth are spores that traveled on comets, arrived here, and the right conditions were given so that they could evolve and generate life. What does this mean? That spores, when they are in that particular condition, have a high resistance to temperature, to pH, and to UV radiation. So what is the advantage for agriculture? It has long-term stability. You don't need any type of conservation, so I don't need refrigeration, I don't need protection from the light. We can manufacture products in powder at low cost. Many bacteria need, in order to be powdered, strategies where you cannot apply heat, and therefore you have to use very hard-to-come-by technologies. But because these are resistant to high temperatures, it can be done and sprayed in a standard technology. It can survive extrusion. This is something that is another part of the bacteria which has to do with animal health. Extrusion is part of where foodstuffs for animals are created, which is normally done under high pressure and high temperature. The bacteria can survive. It can be incorporated in that process, which is one of the first processes in the manufacturing of animal foods. It's got a long, useful life. They can live for years. There are studies where maybe centuries, and then there is a resistance to environmental conditions. Is this enough for a microorganism? There are many microorganisms who can create spores, bacteria and fungus and other microorganisms, mycobacteria, for example. But bacillus, of course, Pyribacillus, they are much more resistant. But even between the different bacillus genus, there are different types. Not all bacteria can survive the same conditions. And this, it is interregulated, and here is a bit more technical due to the system of signaling of the spore, and this can be improved. And it's something that we do at Bactools to formulate a way of cultivation where we may have spores that are more resistant. But also we will not only focus on the spiralization, but also on germination or growth. So our bacteria also have a system of growth that is pretty efficient compared to other bacteria that we've had. And once it is in the soil, and here you can see the PGPR effect, which is the plant growth promoting rhizobacteria. And here we have two different effects. One that is relating to what Juan mentioned, which is the bacteria for phosphate, which is to take the phosphate from the soil, which, as most of you know, is not accessible for plants, and it makes it bioavailable, or the indirect promotion, which can be to induce the immune system in plants or the control of fungi. So those effects are generated because it gives a protection that is not direct onto the plant. This is something that Juan mentioned, but Bacillus is not a new technology that we have invented. It is a technology that came up in 1872, as Juan was saying. Cone classified these microorganisms. In 1900s, there were papers in Japan with regards to rice. So we're speaking about a technology that has over 100 years in existence. In 1940, 1960, there were some composites that were created with an effect on agriculture. They identified a particular bacteria that can fixate nitrogen and make spores. And they also see that it can produce, between 1960 and 1990, they can see that it can actually help the immune system of plants. In 1978, they classify PGPR as an organism, and Kopler says it has an important role to play in PGPR. We're speaking about 50 years ago now. So it is a technology that, as we've said, is not new. And in 1990 to 2000, the genome was sequenced. And then we got the corn BT, which have a gen from a bacillus, which is this bacillus and has an insecticide property. And the most important right now is the systems to genetically modify these that are much more specific. So the spore is the pillar of our agricultural products, and what we can classify in 5 generations of products: mono crops, consortiums, powder products, formulated PGPR products, and also with secondary metabolites. The product, as I was mentioning before, the BSP, which is a Bacillum amyloglycophasin, which, if we don't have phosphate, of course, plants don't have such good growth. These are bacteria that have other strategies that can solubilize phosphate, and this is very important. Within the plant, you cannot see it properly there, that are necessary for the plant to develop normally. And here you can see the list of these features. Why is the second generation of the consortium interesting? Because many times, like it happens in football, one player cannot win the World Cup, as we know. Until you don't get an ideal team in place, you do not get the World Cup. So our idea is to have this type of idea. A consortium is composed by 4 bacteria, which are listed on the screen. And the idea is by increasing the variety of the consortium to get better yield. The third generation, which is the solid products, I have skipped through, and now I go to the 4th generation of products, which would be the combination with chemical products. Here we have 2 different strategies. One is agredio, which is something that Juan mentioned already, which is to incorporate the liquid product to another liquid product. But we also have this idea, which is to, by using a lot of technology, a lot of coating, to be able to get great absorption per bacteria, per granule of chemical solid fertilizer, and to be able to guarantee quality fertilizer. I went pretty quickly, right? And this, sorry, I made a mistake here. The 5th generation is the design of secondary metabolites that are incorporated to the products that we're working on. This is something we would do with a metabolic optimization. Our idea is not to do genetic modification in the first phase, but to look through different types of crops, or by incorporating various substances to the productive process to be able to get the composites that bacteria can do, for example, lipopeptides. And this generally creates a synergy effect where the efficiency of the biological increases on the field. And many times in the normal growth conditions, it can be done in a low quantity. So it is interesting to work in order to make these components rise.
To conclude, the lipopeptides, our star product right now, we are trying to optimize. These are compounds. If we modify the source of carbon or nitrogen, we can regulate synthesis. And what is the importance of these compounds? They can colonize the root and they create antimicrobial activity against pathogens, and they are inducers of the immune system of plants. Thank you very much. Thank you, Marcos and Juan Manuel. While we wait for some questions from the audience, I will ask my questions. Juan, you mentioned the product AgriBio, a collaboration between Bactools and AgriFert, which is a traditional fertilizer company. There is a consortium for bacterial products, and you mentioned a technology package or an evolution or a new way to work, or a new idea. Could you please elaborate on that? Yes, perhaps I was not clear. AgriBio is a product. At Bactools, when we started working on this product with AgriFer, the idea was to develop a joint project or a joint product. At Bactools, we always say we have an academic background because we are biotechnologists. This allows us to foster the development of the company. And we are here at Aapresid to share how productive processes are being transformed by technology changes, and they create an impact on productivity. Most of the technologies throughout history have reached a productive plateau. That will happen at some point for whatever reason, but there's something that is quite evident, which is the fertilizer. In the no-till farming strategy, we understand technology and inputs in a different way. It is not a substitution technology. That is not our view. We have clear results. Let's imagine that no-till farming occurred between the 90s and the present day. There are producers that started farming in a different way, and their yield has gone from 1,000 kilograms per hectare to 5,000 kilograms per hectare. So this is a way of understanding a window of opportunity with technology. We understand it, and Bactools understands this. That is why we consider bio inputs not as an environmental issue, as a substitute, but as a component of bioeconomics, a productive model that will improve the productive system. And It is also the case that in the agricultural sector, technologies are introduced. We have an ambitious vision. It is quite utopian. And the idea is to create big productive changes, such as the green revolution. And with no-till farming, we believe that with inclusion of biologicals, the use of chemicals, we believe it will be a big technology leap. Perhaps it is a silly example, but let us take it to a global scale. 1 kilo less per hectare of nitrogen. What is the impact at global level? Always taking into account profitability and productivity. And that is why the Green Revolution was introduced, and no-till farming, to increase productivity and to solve a problem that is unavoidable, which is providing food for the world. Thank you. Marcos, I have a question for you. I have many questions, in fact, but how do you view the future development of bio-inputs, emphasizing this idea of old new technologies? These are natural microorganisms, so they have benefits, they have characteristics, for instance, sporas. You also mentioned the partnerships or consortia, and as I showed during the presentation, the partnerships or consortiums should be more specialized, because not all land is the same, so not all soils are the same. We can have different compounds, but we are always talking about sporas. So let us try to find specific solutions for the land in Buenos Aires. In Mendoza, they have a different type of soil. For instance, with a certain urea components, there are some components that cannot be used. The idea is to find solutions or bio-inputs that are specific for each crop. Thank you. It's very clear. Are there any questions from the audience? In the meantime, I have a question for both of you. Why do you think that the old technologies are now so current? So you talked about the historical perspective and also the sporas with meteorites or meteors or okay, I was saying that the evolution of different technologies occurred with a very fast pace, and there is also a sophisticated outlook, and I believe that we have lost sight of the historical perspective. In the 1900s, there were some innovations, and in 1600, the microscope was invented. So we have to consider that history. Everything happened very quickly, and the main biotech companies in agriculture have chosen other paths, and they have pushed technology advances. But microorganisms and bio-inputs, modified organisms and synthetic molecules have always been there. They have always existed, they continue to exist, And we need to take into account the fact that even though we have had the microscope for 600 years, we know very little about the benefits of microorganisms. And we know very little about the possibility of finding microorganisms that have developed over thousands of years in certain conditions. There is another company that brings microorganisms from Antarctica, and there is a lot to explore. The combination of thermophiles with other elements. So those combinations and the benefits of those products. And there's something else that has to do with processes, with industry, and with biotech. Marco mentioned this. It has to do with producing the microorganism. We have talked with agronomists or technical specialists or producers, and they imagine that they can grow microorganisms and then dispose of them very easily. But you have to take into account the full life cycle. You need a degree of formulation. And talking about our product, there is a world to develop. I don't believe it has been explored enough. It has to do with the metabolic processes of those microorganisms, to study the metabolic processes of microorganisms, deciding their metabolic routes so that they will produce hormones, lipopeptides, so that the final product or the finished product is far from being reached. The arrival of microorganisms to agricultural production from the technology perspective has just started. We also have other options, but we believe that in the future products will be improved and their technology elements will be incredible. Now, I understand about the adoption of technology by producers, and I understand there is also resistance to adoption of technology. Are there any questions? This was not my presentation, the last version of my presentation. In the presentation I had a cost study. It shows all the results with a positive return of investment for the consortium before and for the other initiative. We got good responsiveness. Before was inoculated with soy. There were 4 sites, 45% of results compared to the control group, where 3.5 and 4.5 increase in yield, and 50% of the tests had even greater percentages. We had no negative results or no results equal to the control group. So we are very excited about this development. I don't have the detailed numbers, but if you come to our booth, we can share that information with you, both for BSP and B4. We have positive results. Thank you very much. Any questions? Do you have tested for other species together with Bacillus? And this consortium of different Bacillus species, are these extreme locations? Will they adapt Will the spora adapt to different environments, such as the north or the south of the country, or do they have certain environmental requirements? Let me answer based on the tests we have performed. The tests were performed at 4 different sites. They have different agricultural and ecological conditions. Rojas, Piamonte, Valcarce, these are the sites. And we found that in certain locations where yield of the control group was low, the yield of our experiment was high. But it also happened in other locations where the control group had high yields and our tested materials also had high yields. But we are going to continue testing in southern areas and also in the Andean region. This is a starting point. And there we found no problems based on the tests we have carried out. And theoretically, there shouldn't be any problems either. As regards compatibility with other microorganisms, we have not validated this at the field, but the different strains were tested and they are compatible. There is no inhibition and they can be used. And one would expect, I favor consortia and they should be as diverse as possible. I believe that the combinations should be better than the individual products. So far, they have equal proportions, but at some point we could reach a more complex consortium. For instance, in an area with a higher efficiency in phosphorus, they could have a higher proportion of solubilizing components. So another factor to consider, and this is a problem for many companies, is the inclusion of certain materials, trichoderma, for instance, spores. The inclusion of spores, some people are not confident regarding the use of spores. So we need to take care of the bioprocess. The industrial plants, most of the plants are bioreactors that produce a strain and they can produce a different strain, and they are relatively sensitive to temperature changes. So when it comes to sterilizing processes, it is quite simple. For spores, it is not so simple. And when you add consortia, you need to think about a different production strategy that requires changing your production process. In our case, as we started with that vision, the plant we are building has been designed to include consortia. It is not the same. If you want to use, we use solutions. In a certain volume, the quantity of each strain has an impact. You can have a consortium of 5 strains, which requires a certain way of production, which is very challenging and particular. And the main companies are not producing in that way today. And that is a key differentiator that we have. Okay. We have one more. How do you apply the bacteria? How do you apply the product to the seed, and how long does it live in soil? I can give you some experimental answers. As regards the experiment, we have already validated that it lives for more than 2 years. We developed the product and it remains stable 2 years later. The same goes for Surcovivo, which is a product inside a fertilizer. Surcobio. Agribio, sorry, that's the name. It has specific chemical characteristics. As regards the field, all the experiments were with single specimens.
So we did not analyze the soil to see if the bacteria grew or anything, but we estimate that the stability is high. We do have tests of inoculation of seeds and how much of it remains in the seed. We've been doing it for 6 months so far. In soy, they were inoculated and it remained in the seed. And from the theoretical point of view, it is demonstrated by experiments the fact that the spore has a much longer lifespan than 2 years. But if I have a bag of 100 kilos of soy, how long the spore remains stuck to the soy? Up to 6 months, there is viability. The thing is that it shouldn't come off the coating of the seed. And something else, the seed does not start growing with the spore. That responds to what I showed you before. It doesn't start in the seed itself, the growth. We don't have any more time. Don't know if you want to ask something else, but we are on time. Sorry, no microphone. If one of the cases was rice, that means that there is a hydric requirement, and I did not see that in the requirements. No. Rice was an example of how long the bacillus has been used. It was in 1900, that test. We did not test rice. But that you do need water, right, for the whole process? For soy, wheat, and corn? Yes, it was in natural conditions. It wasn't in waterless conditions. The results that we have the rains that we had during the test time. I don't have that number there, but we can analyze that. But in the results, there is soil analysis, and we do all of the recovery and collection. But in arid lands, that will be an issue. Yes, of course. Okay, so we are finishing here. We thank everybody for having come to talk to us. Thank you, Juan and Marcos. And come and see us at our stand.